Welcome. Today we're going to talk about LAB or Lactobacillus serum. This video is an excerpt from our Aquaponic Master Class, Aquaponic Pest Control course, and Aquaponic Cannabis Master Class. If you're looking for more deep-depth information on Korean natural farming practices utilizing aquaponics, be sure to check out any of those three courses. We cover quite a bit at length in all of those courses. This section on LAB is from that class. And as you can see here, here's a nice separation between the curds in the whey here in the first photo. The curds are the thicker, fattier portion, and the whey or labs is the part that we're going to use in our aquaponic system. Labs is critical for food safety, and we'll talk all about that here a little bit later in the presentation. If you're a person practicing aquaponics, you should be dosing LAB at least once every 1 to 2 weeks in order to ensure proper food safety in your aquaponic system. Lactobacillic acid bacteria serum is actually has been used for a very long time. It's used in yogurt, used in cheese making, but it's been used in agriculture for a very, very long time in Asia as a way to eliminate fungal pathogens in particular, but also just increase general plant vigor. One thing a lot of people don't know about lactobacillus serum is that it actually contains a lot of vitamin B and different vitamin B compounds, depending on which species of lactobacillus we're talking about, which greatly enhances its ability to act as a plant growth stimulator. But a plant growth stimulator that you can actually drink, whereas most PGRs you cannot drink. Well, you can drink them once, but not too many times after that. So lactobacillus ferment really, really helps increase plant growth as well as fish growth while eliminating fish waste from the system. So if you have a lot of fish waste that makes it past your filters, starting to get some sludge in the bottom of your media beds, you have that silt that builds up in the bottom of your DWC beds if you're running a bigger commercial system. LAB loves to get in and eliminate all that. That's its favorite food source. It loves to seek out those anaerobic pockets that can cause pH problems. If you have a clogged IAVS or sand bed, this can be a great way to help eliminate that sludgy E. coli fest that ends up in those sand beds. So definitely, if you are dealing with clogged beds, by media beds or otherwise, this should be something you absolutely should be dosing. Just remember, if you are using it for the purpose of cleaning up a more dirty system or a system that has a lot more affluent in the system, you're going to also see a nitrogen spike when that starts to break that down. So be sure to back off on your fish feeding a little bit and give yourself some nitrogen buffer because if you have a very dirty system and you dose it, it will raise the nitrogen pretty quick. So just as a caution on that, if you are starting off with this, maybe cut the dose in half in the beginning just to reduce that nitrogen increase temporarily. Now, once that system's been cleaned up, that nitrogen spike will go away. It's just basically consuming that waste that was in there that made it past the filter. So it's putting it back into the water column is what it's doing. So just be mindful of that if you do have a particularly dirty system or very clogged beds or sand, that it actually can be a little bit of a nuisance in terms of the nitrogen spike. But it will eliminate E. coli, salmonella, listeria, lots of bad pathogens. And actually, there's even studies utilizing lactobacillus in meat processing facilities and slaughterhouses, and actually had a better efficacy rate for eliminating human pathogens than bleach or alcohol did, which is kind of crazy. It also greatly reduces fish mortality. If you have perch, if you have bluegill, if you have any kind of more aggressive, cichlids, fish that beat up on each other, LAB dramatically reduces the secondary infections that they get. So they don't get those surface secondary bacterial infections, they don't get those surface secondary fungal infections, which then generally cause mortality. So the fish is able to have time to heal and doesn't get those secondary infections, which often can be fatal. Most labs takes between 2 and 5 days. It just depends on the size of the batch and the temperature that you're doing. Egg will grow slower at colder temperatures and faster at higher temperatures, so adjust accordingly. It can also be used as an organic certifiable pH down. If you're an organic certified aquaponics facility, it can be very hard to find an organic certifiable pH down. This is one of the best options at a dose of a 1 to 1,000. So 1 gallon of LAB per 1,000 gallons of aquaponic system volume, depending on your alkalinity, starting alkalinity, it will drop your pH 0.1 to 0.2 at a 1 to 1000. So just be mindful of that if you're doing the math for pH down. And remember, anytime you adjust pH, the slower the better. You don't want to adjust more than 0.4 in a 24-hour period. LAB, the curds and the fat, which we showed you in the first slide, actually is a great fish food. We feed it to all the fish on all the facilities that I run. And it's just it's fat and protein and vitamins. So there's no negative to it. If it washes into the system, into the filter, well, it just seeded more labs in the system. So no big deal. You can also take the curd and press it and cook it and turn it into cheese if that's what you want to do. So you can feed yourself and your animals and your fish all with one big batch of labs. So where can we get different lactobacillus bacteria? So we can get it from milk. We can get it from unpasteurized milk. We can get it from yogurt. We can get it from kefir grains. We can get it from probiotic pills, like you see here, the super lactobacillus. That's one you can buy at your local drugstore. You ask them for it at the drugstore counter. It's not prescription. They just keep it in a refrigerator in the back. It's for people that are colonizing their flora, their gut biome after taking antibiotics. Well, it also works really good at treating fungal infections on, plants as well. So if you're, in this middle of the city and you don't have access to yogurt or kefir because you live in the hood, you definitely have a drugstore around that you can get the super lactobacillus from. EM1 is another good option, or kefir grains if you're in a more hippie area, as well as air collected. So you can wash rice and take the rice wash with a cheesecloth on top and actually air collect yeast and lactobacillus from your local area as well. We'll talk about that when we get to the actual recipe. And what can you treat with it? Well, LABS treats powdery mildew, botrytis, fusarium, pythium, septoria, most fungal pathogens in general, and even some bacterial infections in plants, as well as treating like we talked about as well, treating fish. If you have a fish with a secondary fungal infection, putting them in water, again, adjust for the pH, because remember it will lower pH. So you might have to add a little pH up, but put them in like 100 to 1 dilution, something much more concentrated, just for, 10 or 20 minutes, just enough to get that to colonize their skin, and then you can toss them back in, and that really helps eliminate that fungal infection. But if you're dosing your system regularly, you don't even have to do that. You can really do a little bit of prevention to totally eliminate the need for any of that. But if you have an aquarium fish, or just a particular fish that got beat up quite a bit, you can separate them and give them a little bit more of an intensive lab treatment at like a 1 to 500 or a 1 to 800 for their temporary holding hospital tank, and then put them back, and they'll heal much faster than they would without it. So LABS for food safety. And this really is something that I've been screaming this for years and no one ever wants to listen. I cannot seem to find a university that'll actually do a proper study, but we've eliminated it in 4 separate commercial farms where we've eliminated E. coli, a non-human pathogenic E. coli from systems without bringing them offline, without bleaching the system, without removing all the crops, without removing all the fish, without completely sterilizing the entire system. You can just treat it with lactobacillus and eliminate it completely. It eliminates streptococcus and some of the other nastier sore-causing fish diseases, as well as E. coli, salmonella, listeria, and countless other things that can end up in your system by accident. A mouse can fall in and die in your system and add a pathogen. You can have, someone not wash their hands properly when they use the restroom. There's different ways that people can accidentally introduce things like E. coli or salmonella into their system. And by having an active colony of lactobacillus in your system, it will eliminate pathogens. And the off chance that someone does make a mistake or does make a bad decision with their food safety protocols, this kind of is like a CYA, cover your butt kind of situation where it'll actively eliminate that from the system, as well as any excess fish waste, and improve plant and fish growth all at the same time. This really should be required by the USDA for commercial aquaponic systems, if you ask me, just in terms of food safety, because it, for the cost of a few gallons of milk per week, you can really, completely eliminate a lot of your liability if you're a larger scale producer, or even just a home producer who doesn't want to worry about getting sick. This can kind of help put your mind at ease, especially if you happen to have ducks or, other things that really tend to be more of a pathogen risk than fish alone in your system. Ducks being a particular concern, this can be a great way to help eliminate some of those issues and some of those concerns while still keeping everything healthy and safe and at maximum efficiency in your system. So you can see here, we started to separate the curds. When your batch is finished, you'll see this curds will kind of rise to the top as they start to float. And then we'll start to scoop those out, and you can see the clear liquid underneath. That's what we're after. That's the labs. And then the white chunky stuff is the curds. You can even use the cheese curds if you want to make some homemade poutine. If you're a Canadian or Northern United States person. Or depending on when you're watching this, it could be the 51st state. We don't know. No, I'm just kidding. We won't get political, but we will make a joke. All right, so as you can see here, this is our labs. You can see there's a few chunks in there. We'll strain this before we actually use it, but this is the actual stuff that we want to use at a 1 to 1,000 as our normal maintenance dosage. And you can pour it directly into your MBBRs if you happen to have an MBBR. Or you can pour it into the fish tank if you want to. Just be sure that you're doing it slow enough to not screw the pH up in that fish tank. But ideally, you want to pour it in the MBBR or the sump if you're going to add it to the system. And then on the right, here you can see the separated curds. There's a little bit of whey in there. Nice, yummy cheese curds. Great for making poutine or, eating. You can make regular cheese with it. Put it on your soil, put it on the base of your fruit trees. Whatever you want to do with it. Lots of things you can do with it. Use it to start more cultures. Take a little bit of this. We take, a scoop or two of this stuff. And then we'll put it in some fresh milk. And it'll look like this, which we did this morning. You can see even though it's this morning, it's already starting to separate. And that's maybe 4 hours, 3-4 hours. So. And then after a couple of days, it takes about 3 days for us to make it on this scale. We can take the cheese off the top, and then we're left with these nice labs. You can see we have our milk. We took a little bit of the curds from our last batch, threw them in there, and then after about 3 days, used the spoon, took the cheese off the top, and then we're left with just these nice liquidy labs, and mix that with our water. With some water, and then spray it on the plants to treat them for powdery mildew, prevent powdery mildew, and enhance the soil at the same time. We can even feed this cheese over to the fish in the system, and it'll also help them stay healthy, eliminate things like E. coli and salmonella, and really help treat a wide range of problems. For the recipe for our LABS, first we're going to get some rice, and we're going to rinse it until we get all that nice dust off the rice wash, and then we're going to take that rice wash and put it in a bowl with a piece of cheesecloth on top of it or a similar size mesh. You could even use an old bubble bag if you got it. Put that over top of it as long as it's clean for 48 hours and let the air collect the lactobacillus and the yeasts from your local area. Be sure not to put that in the sun or it'll cook off everything. Make sure it's in a place in the shade that gets good airflow. Next, you're going to take about 1/4 gallon of that rice wash after it's set out for 4 days and put that into your clean container that you're going to make your milk in or your LAB. And in this case, we're going to use a 5-gallon bucket for this particular batch. And you can scale this up or down as needed. I know there's some other recipes online for smaller batches, but I like to always do everything in 5-gallon batches or bigger because most aquaponic systems I'm working with are a few thousand gallons or bigger. So you're going to pour 4 gallons of whole milk into your 5-gallon container. Then you're going to inoculate it with an additional, a couple kefir grains, a scoop of non-flavored yogurt, or whatever else. And the reason why we add additional lactobacillus species aside from the traditional air collection version of that they teach you in traditional KNF is because if we diversify those lactobacillus species, we'll get a much bigger variation of vitamin B compounds and as the output because lactobacillus produce lots of vitamin B, and by diversifying them, we can actually increase the growth stimulation properties of our lactobacillus serum. Then we're going to stir that all up, the grains and the rice wash and the milk for about 2 to 3 minutes. Then we're going to gently put the lid on from our bucket. Now, I don't want to seal it to where it's airtight, but I do want to seal it enough to where it's going to mostly keep the outside air out, but still allow it to burp if it needs to burp or You can use an airlock like you would for winemaking or anything like that if you want to as well. As long as it can breathe a little bit, but not necessarily pull air back in. That's really what you want, because lactobacillus can operate as an anaerobe or an aerobic bacteria. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care if it's aerobic or non-anaerobic. So it definitely is, great for those eliminating those anaerobic zones, because it can tolerate, both oxygen and rich and oxygen deprived environments. It's one of the reasons why it's the best for eliminating pathogens, for instance. And then you're going to strain off the curd. After you've let that sit for 48 to 72 hours, that should separate. The curd should be on top, like in our photos. Then you're going to strain off the curd from the top, and then use it for your next batch if you want to seed it. That curd has lots of live lactobacillus, so take a scoop of the whey, a scoop of the curd, toss it in the next batch of labs that you're making, and then make another batch. I know some people in Korean natural farming traditionally say to store it, mix it with sugar. I do not like to do that. I find that the efficacy drops dramatically once you store it that way. So I always make fresh batches, and then I'll just keep, say for instance, I need to like go for a vacation for a week or two, or I got other stuff going on. I can actually take this labs once I make it and put it in the fridge, which slows down the replication rate, and just keep feeding it a little bit of milk. And I can keep, a quarter gallon, a half gallon of it going, and keep a live culture alive in the fridge. And then I can spin it up to a bigger batch whenever I need to. And that's what I really prefer to do over storing it with sugar and all that. I find that it's great for labs, or I'm sorry, great for IMO, but not as good for labs, in my experience, in terms of efficacy. And then you're going to take your clear liquid after you move the curds. You're going to take your clear liquid and then dilute that down with water to 1 to 600 or 1 to 1000 if you're doing a foliar spray. If you're going to dose it into your aquaponic system or hydroponic system, dose it at 1 to 1000 unless you're treating an issue. The other good thing with LAB is that it does a really good job eliminating pythium and root rot as well. If you're dealing with high heat in the summertime, for instance, like if I'm growing an aquaponic system in Texas or Oklahoma, you're not going to grow in aquaponics in that part of the world, or Florida, where a lot of people traditionally shut down in August and July because of the temperatures and the water temperatures. You don't have to do that. You can absolutely just dose lactobacillus in order to completely like keep the pythium and stuff under control, hyperoxygenate that water as best you can, and you can still grow crops in it just the same without dealing with any of the root issues. It's the only way that we've managed to grow, crops throughout the full summer in Texas and Oklahoma and Florida and anywhere in the deep South, to be honest with you, just because of the temperature and the humidity. You will get root rot and pythium if you do not dose labs. I guess in theory, could keep it in check with trichoderma, but trichoderma is going to have a much more detrimental effect to your overall biodiversity than lactobacillus does. Lactobacillus tends to find a much better symbiosis with the system in terms of the microbes, and not wipe everything out the same way the trichoderma tends to be more of an over-dominating microbe. Hopefully this allows you to help learn more about lactobacillus and using lactobacillus in your system. Everyone doing aquaponics should be dosing lactobacillus every week or two, and should be making this from, not only food safety, but, overall system health. Eliminating fish waste, pathogens, both for fish and humans and plants, as well as, giving you the option of making cheese that week if you want to. So thanks for watching. Be sure to check out any of our courses we have available. We have an Aquaponic Master Class, Aquaponic Cannabis Master Class. We have a Minerals and Microbes class, and we have a Pathogen and Pest course as well. So be sure to check those out, and check out the other videos on the Aquaponics YouTube channel. We'll see you guys again next time. Be sure to check out the Growing with Fishes podcast. Over 1,000 hours of educational content. We have content on all things plants and soil science, as well as aquaponics, hydroponics, and much more. You can find the show on your favorite podcast app: YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google, SoundCloud, Amazon Music, and a whole bunch of other places. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out any of the amazing resources that we have available to help people with their garden. You can check me out on YouTube over at Aquaponics. You can check us out over on your favorite podcast app with Growing with Fishes or Aquaponics, depending on which app that you're using. Most of them are registered for both, but sometimes the indexing works a little screwy on others. You can email me at potentponics@gmail.com. Be sure to check out our classes as well: aquaponicmasterclass.com, apmjclass.com, thepestclass.com. You can check out my website over at potentponics.com or our Facebook group, Aquaponic Cannabis Growers. Thanks for watching.